The stranger stumbled into Sweetwater, Texas on a scorching afternoon in July 1876, covered in dried blood and dust, with eyes that held nothing but confusion and fear. Rebecca Lawson watched from the window of her small boarding house as he collapsed near the water trough outside the general store, his body hitting the ground with a sickening thud that made her drop the curtain and rush toward the door. She was 23 years old, a widow for 2 years now, and she had learned to mind her own business in this harsh frontier town, but something about the way he fell, something about the desperate way his fingers clawed at the dirt, made her forget every lesson she had learned about self-preservation. She ran across the dusty street, her plain brown skirt kicking up small clouds with each step, and knelt beside him. His face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut, and there was a deep gash across his temple that had bled profusely but was now crusted over with dirt and dried blood. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that might have been handsome if it was not matted with filth. His clothes were torn, his boots were worn through at the soles, and he wore no gun belt, which was unusual for any man traveling through Texas territory. "Help me get him inside," she called to old Henry, who ran the general store. The elderly man hesitated, his weathered face showing the caution that came from surviving in a town where strangers often meant trouble, but Rebecca's determined expression left no room for argument. Together, they half-carried, half-dragged the stranger into her boarding house, laying him on the narrow bed in the small room she kept for emergencies. For 3 days, he burned with fever. Rebecca sat beside him, changing the cool cloths on his forehead, cleaning his wounds with whiskey that made him thrash even in his unconscious state, and spooning water between his cracked lips. She should have called for Dr. Morrison, but the doctor had ridden to Fort Worth to tend to a rancher's wife and would not be back for a week. She was on her own, with only the basic nursing skills she had learned from her mother and the stubborn determination that had gotten her through her husband's death and the subsequent struggle to keep his boarding house running. On the 4th morning, his eyes opened. They were dark brown, almost black, and they stared at the ceiling with the blank confusion of someone waking in a completely unfamiliar place. Rebecca was sitting in the chair beside the bed, darning one of her stockings, and she set down her needle when she noticed his consciousness. "You are awake," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "You are in Sweetwater, Texas. My name is Rebecca Lawson. You collapsed outside the general store 4 days ago." He turned his head slowly toward her, wincing at the movement and his eyes focused on her face. She saw him struggle, saw his brow furrow with effort, and then saw the panic that flooded his expression. "I do not know," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. "I do not know where I am. I do not know who I am." His breathing quickened, and he tried to sit up, but his body was too weak. He fell back against the pillow, his chest heaving. "I cannot remember anything. My name, where I came from, how I got here. There is nothing. Just darkness." Rebecca set aside her mending and moved closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Do not panic. You took a bad blow to the head. Maybe your memory will come back with time. For now, you need to rest and heal." "Who am I?" The question was desperate, raw with fear. His hands clutched at the thin blanket covering him. "Why cannot I remember my own name?" She wished she had answers for him, but she had none. "I do not know." "You are not carrying anything that might tell us. No papers, no letters, nothing in your pockets. Your clothes are worn, but they are well made. Your hands have calluses that suggest you work with them, maybe ranching or farming. But beyond that, I cannot tell you anything." He closed his eyes, and she saw tears leak from beneath his lids. It broke her heart in a way she had not expected. This grown man, this stranger, reduced to tears by the terrifying emptiness in his mind. Without thinking, she took his hand in hers and held it gently. "You are safe here," she said. "That much I can promise you. Whatever happened before, whoever you were, right now you are safe. We will figure out the rest." He held onto her hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that had become completely untethered. "Thank you," he managed. "I do not even know how to thank you properly, but thank you." Over the next week, Rebecca cared for him as he regained his strength. She brought him broth and bread, helped him sit up when he was too weak to manage alone, and talked to him about Sweetwater and her life there. She told him about her late husband, Thomas, who had died in a cattle stampede, leaving her with the boarding house and a pile of debts she was still working to pay off. She told him about the town, about the rough cattlemen who came through, about the farmers trying to scratch out a living from the harsh land, about the small community of women who helped each other survive in this unforgiving place. He listened with an intensity that suggested he was trying to build a new world from her words, to create some framework for existence when his own past was a complete void. He asked questions, his voice growing stronger each day, and she answered as best she could. When he was strong enough to sit up for longer periods, she brought him the Fort Worth newspaper, and he read it with the focus of a scholar, absorbing every word about the world he could not remember. "I need a name," he said one evening as the sun set outside the window, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. "I cannot keep being him or the stranger. Even if I cannot remember my real name, I need something to be called." Rebecca had been thinking about this. "What feels right to you? What name, when you hear it, seems like it might fit?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Kieran," he said finally. "I do not know why, but when I was reading the newspaper, I saw that name in a story and something in me responded to it. Kieran." "Does that sound foolish?" "No," she said gently. "Kieran is a good, strong name, and you need a surname too for when people ask." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw vulnerability mixed with something else, something that made her heart beat a little faster. "Would you choose one for me? You are the first person in this new life of mine, the only person who has shown me kindness. I trust your judgment." She felt the weight of that trust, the significance of naming this man who had no past. "Fallen," she said. "Kieran Fallen. It sounds right together, does it not?" He tested the name on his lips, speaking it aloud several times. "Kieran Fallen. Yes, I will be Kieran Fallen." He smiled at her, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face. Despite the fading bruises and the scar that would mark his temple permanently, he was handsome when he smiled. More than handsome. There was something in his expression, some quality of openness and gratitude that drew her in despite her determination to keep her distance. When Kieran was well enough to walk, Rebecca found him a job at the livery stable. The owner, a gruff man named Samuel Porter, needed help mucking stalls and tending the horses, and he agreed to take Kieran on despite his lack of memory. "A man is what he does, not what he remembers," Samuel said pragmatically. "If he works hard, I do not care if he cannot recall his own mother's face." Kieran threw himself into the work with determination that impressed everyone who saw him. He woke before dawn and worked until dusk, learning everything he could about horses and harnesses and the 100 small tasks that kept a livery running. He discovered he had a natural way with animals, a gentle patience that calmed even the most skittish horses. Samuel began to trust him with more responsibilities, and within a month, Kieran was handling customers and managing the business when Samuel needed to be away. He rented a small room in Rebecca's boarding house, insisting on paying full price despite her protests. "You saved my life," he told her firmly. The least I can do is pay honest rent like any other boarder. They fell into a routine that felt comfortable and right. Rebecca would wake early to prepare breakfast for her boarders, of which there were usually 3 or 4 at any given time, mostly traveling salesmen and occasional cowboys passing through. Kieran would eat quickly and head to the livery, returning in the evening dusty and tired, but with a satisfied expression that suggested the work gave him purpose. After dinner, they would often sit on the boarding house's small porch, watching the sun set over Sweetwater's dusty Main Street, and they would talk. Those conversations became the center of Rebecca's days. Kieran was intelligent and thoughtful, asking questions about everything from politics to religion to the nature of memory itself. He wanted to understand the world he found himself in, to build a foundation of knowledge that might compensate for the missing pieces of his past. And Rebecca, who had been lonely for so long, found herself opening up to him in ways she had never opened up to anyone, not even her late husband. "You think I was a good man?" Kieran asked one evening in late August as they sat together in the gathering darkness. "Before I lost my memory, do you think I was someone worth being?" Rebecca looked at him, at the earnest concern in his eyes, and felt her heart ache. "I think you are a good man now, and that is what matters. You work hard, you treat people with respect, you care about doing right. Those things come from inside you, from who you are at your core, not from your memories. But what if I did terrible things? What if I am running from something awful I did and my mind has blocked it out to protect me?" "Then you have a chance to be better," Rebecca said firmly. "We all have pasts, Kieran. Some we remember and some we do not. But every day we wake up, we have a choice about who we are going to be that day. You have chosen to be kind and hardworking and honest. That is what I see, and that is what matters to me." He reached over and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "You have given me more than life, Rebecca. You have given me hope that I can build something good even without knowing where I came from. I do not have words for how much that means to me." She squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm from his work at the livery, and admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Kieran Fallon, this man without a past, this stranger who had stumbled into her life and somehow become essential to it. The realization terrified her. She had loved her husband, had mourned him deeply, but what she felt for Kieran was different. Thomas had been a good man, but a simple one, content with his cattle and his drink and the uncomplicated pleasures of frontier life. Kieran had depth, had a hunger to understand and grow and become more than he was. He challenged her, made her think, made her feel alive in ways she had forgotten were possible, but she said nothing about her feelings. It seemed too soon, too complicated. He was still healing, still finding his footing in this new life. The last thing he needed was the pressure of her emotions added to everything else he was dealing with. September brought a stranger to Sweetwater, a hard-faced man in his 40s who rode a fine black horse and wore twin revolvers on his hips. He tied up outside the saloon and went inside, but not before his cold eyes swept up and down the main street, taking in everything with the calculating gaze of someone looking for something specific. Rebecca noticed him from the boarding house window and felt a chill of unease that she could not explain. The stranger's name was Dutch Corrigan, and within hours everyone in town knew he was a bounty hunter. He was looking for someone, he said, a man in his mid-20s with dark hair who might have suffered a head injury. There was a reward of $500 for information leading to this man's capture. Rebecca's blood ran cold when she heard the description. She was at the general store buying flour when old Henry mentioned it, and she had to grip the counter to keep her knees from buckling. "What did this man do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Old Henry shrugged. Corrigan would not say exactly. Something about theft and assault over in New Mexico territory. Said the man is dangerous and not to be trusted. Rebecca bought her flour and walked back to the boarding house in a daze. It could be coincidence. Dark-haired men in their mid-20s were not exactly rare on the frontier. The head injury was more specific, but still, it might be someone else Corrigan was looking for. She told herself this over and over, but she could not shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her stomach like a stone. She said nothing to Kieran that evening. He came home from the livery in good spirits, talking about a mare he had helped deliver from colic, and how Samuel had praised his quick thinking. Rebecca smiled and nodded and served dinner, but her mind was spinning with fear and uncertainty. What if Corrigan was looking for Kieran? What if Kieran really had done something terrible? But even as she thought it, she rejected the idea. The man she had come to know, the man she had fallen in love with, was not capable of the things Corrigan described. She was sure of it. The next morning, Dutch Corrigan came to the boarding house. Rebecca was sweeping the front porch when he rode up, his face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat, his hands resting casually near his guns. He did not dismount, just looked down at her from his horse with those cold, assessing eyes. "Morning, madam. Name is Dutch Corrigan. I am looking for information about a man who might have passed through here. Dark hair, mid-20s, might have had a head injury. You seen anyone like that?" Rebecca's heart hammered, but she kept her face calm. She had learned to hide her emotions during the hard years after Thomas's death, when every cattle buyer and creditor who came to her door was looking for signs of weakness. "We get travelers through here all the time, Mr. Corrigan. That description could fit half a dozen men. This one would have shown up maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago. Probably looking rough, maybe confused or disoriented, might not have remembered who he was." Corrigan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Might have needed a woman's kindness to nurse him back to health. So he knew, or at least suspected." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "I run a boarding house, Mr. Corrigan, not a hospital. If you are looking for someone specific, perhaps you should speak with the sheriff." "Oh, I intend to, madam. I surely do intend to." He touched the brim of his hat in a mockery of courtesy. "You have a pleasant day now." He rode off toward the sheriff's office, and Rebecca stood frozen on the porch, her mind racing. She had to warn Kieran. She had to find out what was really going on. She dropped the broom and ran to the livery, ignoring the curious stares of townspeople who saw her rushing through the street. Kieran was in the stable, brushing down a chestnut gelding. He looked up with a smile when she entered, but his expression changed immediately when he saw her face. "What is wrong?" "There is a bounty hunter in town. His name is Dutch Corrigan. He is looking for a man matching your description, someone from New Mexico territory wanted for theft and assault." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Kieran, he came to the boarding house. He knows, or at least he suspects. We need to figure out what to do." The color drained from Kieran's face. "New Mexico territory, theft and assault." He set down the brush with shaking hands. "Rebecca, I do not know. I do not remember anything from before I woke up in your boarding house. I cannot tell you if I did those things or not." "I know you," Rebecca said fiercely, moving closer to him. "I have spent every day with you for 2 months. You are not a thief. You are not violent. Whatever Corrigan thinks he knows, he is wrong. But what if he is not?" Kieran's voice was anguished. "What if I did do something terrible and I just cannot remember? What if the person I was before is someone completely different from who I think I am now?" Rebecca took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Then that person is gone. The man standing in front of me right now is good and kind and honest. That is who I know. That is who I believe in." He stared at her and something shifted in his expression. "Why?" he whispered. Why do you believe in me so much? Why would you risk defending me when you do not even know the truth? Because I love you." The words came out before she could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying. "I love you, Kieran Fallen, whoever you were before and whoever you are now. I love the man who works hard every day to build a good life. I love the man who reads newspapers to understand the world better. I love the man who sits with me on the porch and talks about anything and everything. I love you, and I am not going to let some bounty hunter take you away without a fight." For a moment, he just stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you too," he said against her hair. "I have loved you since I woke up and saw you sitting beside my bed, taking care of a stranger you had no reason to help. You are the first real thing in my life, Rebecca. The only thing I am sure of. I love you." They stood there in the dimness of the stable, holding each other while fear and uncertainty swirled around them. Finally, Rebecca pulled back enough to look up at him. "We need to find out the truth. We need to know what really happened in New Mexico territory. Maybe if we can prove you are not the man Corrigan is looking for, we can end this." "How?" Kieran asked helplessly. "I do not even know where to start." "The sheriff. We go to Sheriff Coleman and we tell him everything. We tell him about your memory loss, about what Corrigan said, and we ask for his help in getting to the truth. Bill Coleman is a fair man. If you are innocent, he will help us prove it." It was a risk, but Rebecca could not see another option. If they ran, it would only make Kieran look guilty. If they stayed silent, Corrigan would keep digging until he found what he was looking for. Their only chance was to confront this head-on. They walked to the sheriff's office together, holding hands like they could draw strength from each other. Sheriff Bill Coleman was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp blue eyes and a mustache that drooped down past his chin. He listened carefully as Kieran explained about waking up with no memory, and Rebecca described finding him collapsed in the street. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied them both. "Dutch Corrigan is known to me," he said finally. "He is a legitimate bounty hunter, but he is not always particular about the details. He has been known to bring in the wrong man if the reward is good enough, and then let the courts sort it out. $500 is enough to make a man see what he wants to see." "So what do we do?" Rebecca asked. "First, I want to see this wanted poster he is carrying. If there is an actual warrant, it will have details beyond just a physical description. Then I want to send some telegrams to New Mexico territory, find out exactly what happened and when. If Kieran here is the man they are looking for, we will know it. But if he is not, I will make damn sure Corrigan understands that before he tries anything in my town." Corrigan arrived at the sheriff's office an hour later, his expression darkening when he saw Kieran sitting there calmly beside Rebecca. "So the bird has flown into the cage on his own," he said with a cold smile. "Saves me the trouble of hunting him down." "Show me the warrant," Sheriff Coleman said without preamble. Corrigan pulled a folded paper from his jacket and tossed it on the desk. Coleman unfolded it and read carefully, his expression unreadable. Rebecca held her breath, her hand tight in Kieran's. "This warrant is for a man named Kyle Maddox," Coleman said slowly. "Wanted for theft of $500 and assault of a store owner in Santa Fe. The incident occurred on May 15th of this year." He looked up at Corrigan. "The warrant says this Maddox has a distinctive scar on his left forearm in the shape of a crescent. It is quite specific about that. Head injuries can confuse things," Corrigan said dismissively. "Man might not remember getting a scar." "Roll up your sleeve," Coleman said to Kieran. Kieran stood and rolled up his left sleeve, holding his arm out for inspection. The skin was tanned from working outdoors, marked with the normal scrapes and calluses of hard labor, but there was no crescent-shaped scar. Coleman examined it carefully, then nodded. No scar. This is not your man, Corrigan. Could be the right arm, Corrigan protested, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Kieran rolled up his right sleeve. Again, no crescent scar. Coleman sat back with a satisfied expression. You are wrong, Corrigan. This is not Kyle Maddox. Now I suggest you move along and find the real man you are looking for. But Corrigan was not ready to give up. He matches the description. Dark hair, right age, head injury. The scar could have been wrong in the report. Or you could be trying to collect a reward on an innocent man, Coleman said coldly. I sent telegrams to Santa Fe while you were on your way here. I expect answers within a few days. Until then, you leave Kieran Fallen alone. That is not a suggestion, Corrigan. That is an order. You understand me? Corrigan's face flushed with anger, but he nodded curtly. I will wait for your telegrams, Sheriff. But if they prove I am right, I am taking him in. He left, slamming the door behind him. Rebecca let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Coleman looked at them both with something that might have been sympathy. I cannot promise this will end well, he said quietly. The telegrams might confirm you are not Maddox, but they also might not help us figure out who you really are. You prepared for that, son? Kieran nodded slowly. I have been preparing for that since I woke up, Sheriff. Not knowing is something I have to live with every day, but at least now maybe we can prove I am not a wanted criminal. The next 3 days were the longest of Rebecca's life. Corrigan stayed in town, a menacing presence who watched them from the shadows. Kieran went to work as usual, refusing to hide or act guilty, and Rebecca kept the boarding house running, but they were both on edge, waiting for news. The telegrams arrived on the 4th day. Sheriff Coleman called them to his office, and his expression was serious but not grim. I have confirmation from Santa Fe, he said. Kyle Maddox was arrested 2 weeks ago in Albuquerque. He is currently in jail awaiting trial. The actual warrant states clearly that he has the crescent scar on his left forearm, along with several other distinguishing marks that do not match Kieran. There is absolutely no question. Kieran Fallen is not Kyle Maddox. Rebecca felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. Kieran closed his eyes and took a shuddering breath. Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you for believing us enough to check. Coleman nodded. I will inform Corrigan. He will not be happy, but he will leave town. You are in the clear on this, son. He hesitated, then added, I also asked if there were any other missing persons reports or wanted posters that might match your description. There were a few possibilities, but nothing concrete. The truth is, if you want to know who you really are, you might have to accept that we may never find out. I know, Kieran said quietly, but at least now I do not have to fear being arrested for something I did not do. They left the sheriff's office feeling lighter than they had in days. Corrigan rode out of town that afternoon without a word, his face dark with frustration at losing his reward. Life in Sweetwater returned to normal, or as normal as it could be for a man with no past, and a woman who loved him. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Kieran turned to Rebecca with a serious expression. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. All right, Rebecca said, feeling a flutter of nervousness. Does it bother you that you do not know who I really am? That I might have been married before, might have children somewhere, might have a whole life I cannot remember? When you say you love me, how can you love someone who is essentially a stranger even to himself? Rebecca thought carefully before answering. I do not love your past, Kieran. I love who you are right now in this moment and every moment we spend together. Yes, you might have had another life. You might have people who miss you and wonder where you are. That thought makes me sad for them and for you. But the man you are now, the man you have chosen to be since you lost your memory, that is the man I love. And if someday your memories come back and you turn out to be someone different, then I will love that person too, because he will still be you at his core." He reached over and took her hand, bringing it to his lips and kissing her knuckles gently. "You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known, or at least the most extraordinary woman I can remember knowing, which amounts to the same thing for me." She laughed, and the sound was lighter than it had been in days. "I am not extraordinary. I am just a widow running a boarding house and trying to get by." "You are extraordinary to me," he insisted. "You saved my life, gave me a name, helped me build a new existence. You stood beside me when a bounty hunter came looking for me, believed in me when you had no reason to. If that is not extraordinary, I do not know what is." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Finally, Kieran spoke again, his voice soft but certain. "Marry me, Rebecca. I do not have much to offer. I do not even have a past to give you, but I can give you my future, every single day of it for as long as I live. I love you. I want to build a life with you, a real life, not just two people who happen to live in the same boarding house. Marry me." Rebecca's heart swelled with joy so intense it was almost painful. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Kieran Fallen, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was like coming home, like finding something she had not even known she was searching for. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling so widely their faces hurt. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church on the edge of town. Rebecca wore her best dress, simple but clean, with a wreath of wildflowers in her hair that she had picked that morning. Kieran wore clothes that Samuel had loaned him, a proper suit that was only slightly too big. The ceremony was attended by everyone in Sweetwater who could spare the time, because the whole town had become invested in their story. Old Henry gave Rebecca away, and Samuel stood up as Kieran's best man, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small church erupted in applause and cheers. They had a modest celebration afterward at the boarding house, with food contributed by various townspeople and music provided by a fiddler who played at the saloon on weekends. Rebecca danced with her new husband, feeling lighter and happier than she had felt in years. Kieran was not a graceful dancer, but he held her close and moved with determined enthusiasm, and that was enough. "I am happy," he told her as they swayed together to a slow tune. "I did not think I would ever feel this way, not after waking up with nothing, but I am truly happy, Rebecca Fallen." She loved hearing her new name on his lips. "So am I. We are going to build a good life together, Kieran. I promise you that." And they did. Kieran continued working at the livery, and within a year, Samuel made him a full partner in the business. Kieran had a gift for the work, and his honest dealing and gentle way with horses brought in customers from surrounding ranches and farms. The livery prospered, and with it, so did Kieran and Rebecca's fortunes. Rebecca continued running the boarding house, but with Kieran's income added to hers, she was finally able to pay off the last of Thomas's debts. It felt like closing a chapter of her life, a final goodbye to the young woman she had been when she first came to Sweetwater as a new bride. She was different now, stronger and surer, and she had Kieran to thank for helping her become that person. They talked often about Kieran's missing past. Sometimes he would get a flash of something, a smell or a sound that seemed familiar, but it was never enough to build a real memory. The doctor who eventually examined him said the blow to his head had likely caused permanent damage, and there was a good chance his memories from before that day would never return. Kieran accepted this with the same patient grace. he brought to everything else in his life. "Maybe it is a gift," he said one night as they lay in bed together, their room lit by moonlight streaming through the window. "If I had my old memories, I might not have been free to become who I am now. I might have been tied to that old life, to old obligations and old mistakes. Instead, I got to start fresh. I got you. That seems like a fair trade to me." Rebecca curled against him, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever wonder if you had a family, if there is someone out there who loved you and lost you?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I figure if I was that important to someone, they would have come looking. The fact that nobody has suggests I was either alone in the world or I was not someone people wanted to find. Either way, my life is here now with you." Their first child was born in the spring of 1878, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. They named him Thomas, after Rebecca's first husband, because she wanted to honor the man who had brought her to Sweetwater and made her life with Kieran possible. Kieran held his son with such tenderness and wonder that Rebecca fell in love with him all over again. "I am a father," he whispered, staring down at the tiny face. "I have a family. I have a real family." "You always had a family," Rebecca told him from the bed, tired but glowing with happiness. "You just have more of one now." Kieran was a devoted father. He would rush home from the livery every evening to spend time with Thomas, playing with him and telling him stories and teaching him things as he grew. When Thomas was old enough to walk, Kieran would take him to the stable and show him the horses, lifting him up to pet their soft noses and explaining in patient detail how to care for them. "You are creating his first memories," Rebecca observed one day as she watched them together. "He will remember these moments with you for his whole life." Kieran looked at her with such emotion in his eyes that she had to look away for a moment. "That means everything to me," he said quietly. "I cannot give him a grandfather or aunts and uncles or family stories about where he came from. But I can give him this. I can give him love and attention and memories worth keeping." In 1880, their second child was born, a daughter they named Ruth. She had Rebecca's auburn hair and Kieran's dark eyes, and she was fierce from the moment she took her first breath. Where Thomas was calm and thoughtful, Ruth was all energy and mischief. Kieran adored her, carrying her around on his shoulders and laughing at her antics even when she was being particularly troublesome. Life was good. Better than good. The livery business thrived, and they were able to build a proper house. A real home with multiple bedrooms and a large kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around two sides. They moved out of the boarding house, which Rebecca sold to a young couple who needed the income, and settled into their new home with their growing family. Sweetwater was growing too. The railroad had come through in 1879, bringing more people and more commerce. There was talk of building a proper school, of paving the main street, of all the improvements that came with prosperity and permanence. Kieran served on the town council, using his natural fairness and good judgment to help make decisions about Sweetwater's future. People respected him, trusted him, and if there were still those who wondered about his mysterious past, they kept their questions to themselves. On a warm evening in October 1883, 7 years after Kieran had stumbled into town, they sat together on their porch watching Thomas and Ruth play in the yard. Thomas was 5 now, and Ruth was 3, and they were arguing about something in the way of children who love each other but cannot agree on anything. Kieran had his arm around Rebecca, and she was leaning into his warmth, feeling completely content. "You ever regret it?" Kieran asked suddenly. "Taking me in, marrying me, building this life with a man who has no history?" Rebecca turned to look at him, surprised. "Never. Not for a single moment. Why would you ask that? He was quiet for a moment, watching their children. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you had turned away that day. If you had decided I was not your problem and left me lying in the street. My life would have gone in a completely different direction if I had even survived at all." "But I did not turn away," Rebecca said firmly. "I saw someone who needed help and I helped, and because I did, I got the most wonderful life I could imagine. You and Thomas and Ruth, this house, this community we have built. That is not something to regret, Kieran. That is something to celebrate every single day." He kissed her temple softly. "You became my first memory, Rebecca. The first thing I knew in this world was you sitting beside my bed taking care of me. Everything good in my life stems from that moment. You are not just my wife. You are my beginning, my foundation, my home. I love you more than I have words to express." "I love you too," she whispered. "My mysterious stranger who became my husband, my partner, my home. I would not change a single thing about our story." They sat together as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in brilliant colors, while their children's laughter rang through the air. It was a moment of perfect peace, perfect happiness, and Rebecca held it close in her heart, knowing these were the memories they were building together, the stories their children would tell their own children someday. 2 years later, in 1885, their third child was born, another boy they named Samuel after Kieran's partner and friend. Samuel had been like a father to Kieran, teaching him the livery business and standing beside him when he had nothing and nobody. Naming their son after him was a way of honoring that bond. Old Samuel was deeply touched by the gesture. He was in his 60s now, slowing down but still sharp as ever, and he doted on his namesake with the affection of a proud grandfather. "This boy is going to be something special," he would say, holding baby Samuel and making ridiculous faces that sent Ruth into fits of giggles. "I can feel it." Life continued its steady, satisfying rhythm. The children grew, the business prospered, and Kieran and Rebecca's love deepened with every passing year. There were challenges, of course. A drought in 1886 that made water scarce and tempers short. A bad winter in 1887 that killed several head of livestock and tested everyone's endurance. But they faced these challenges together, supporting each other and their community, and they always emerged stronger for it. Kieran never regained his memories. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Rebecca would see him staring off into the distance with a look of concentration, as if he was trying to grasp something just beyond his reach. But those moments became less frequent over time, and eventually they stopped altogether. Whoever he had been before did not matter anymore. He was Kieran Fallon, husband and father, business owner and town councilman, a respected member of the Sweetwater community. That was identity enough. In 1890, when Thomas was 12 and showing a keen interest in horses, Kieran began teaching him the livery business in earnest. Thomas had his father's gentle patience with animals and his mother's head for numbers, and it was clear he would make a fine horseman someday. Ruth, at 10, was more interested in books than animals. She spent hours reading everything she could get her hands on, and Rebecca began teaching her more advanced lessons than the small school offered, recognizing in her daughter the same hunger for knowledge that Kieran had shown when he was first building his new life. Young Samuel, at 5, was still finding his way, but he showed signs of being the most adventurous of the three, always exploring and asking questions and getting into minor scrapes that sent Rebecca's heart racing with worry. "They are good children," Kieran said one evening as they prepared for bed, tired from a long day but satisfied. "We have built something real here, Rebecca, something lasting." "We have," she agreed, brushing out her hair at the vanity he had built for her. She was 41 now, her auburn hair showing threads of silver, but Kieran still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. I think about that sometimes, about how much has changed since you stumbled into town. We were both so lost back then in different ways. And somehow we found each other and built all of this. Kieran came up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders and meeting her eyes in the mirror. You were never lost, Rebecca. You were the compass that guided me home. She reached up and placed her hand over his. We guided each other. That is what love is it not? Being each other's home, each other's certainty in an uncertain world. He bent down and kissed the top of her head. I do not need my old memories, because every memory I have worth keeping has you in it. Our wedding day, the birth of our children, every morning I wake up beside you and every evening we spend together. Those are the memories that matter. Their life together continued to be marked by small joys and daily triumphs. They celebrated their children's successes and comforted them through their failures. They worked alongside their neighbors to build Sweetwater into a thriving town with a school and a church and businesses that drew people from miles around. They grew older together, their love deepening into something comfortable and enduring, a partnership built on respect and trust and genuine affection. In 1895, when Kieran was around 44 years old, although he could never be sure of his exact age, a man came to Sweetwater asking questions about someone matching Kieran's description. Rebecca's heart seized with old fears when she heard about it, but this man was not a bounty hunter. He was a lawyer from El Paso, representing a family searching for a son who had disappeared nearly 20 years before. Sheriff Coleman, who was still serving Sweetwater faithfully, despite his advancing age, brought the lawyer to see Kieran at the livery. Kieran listened carefully as the lawyer explained that a family named Finnegan had lost their son, Kevin, in 1876. He had been traveling from New Mexico to Texas when his group was attacked by bandits. Several people had died, and Kevin had been missing ever since. The family had never stopped looking. The description matches you closely, the lawyer said, pulling out a photograph. This is Kevin Finnegan, taken in 1875. Kieran took the photograph and studied it carefully. The man in the picture was young, probably early 20s, with dark hair and strong features. There was a resemblance to Kieran's own face, certainly, but nearly 20 years had passed. Many men could fit that general description. I do not remember being Kevin Finnegan, Kieran said slowly. I do not remember anything from before July 1876, but I suppose it is possible. The lawyer nodded. The Finnegans are willing to pay for you to come to El Paso to meet them. They would like to see if you might be their son. Even if you do not remember them, they would like closure one way or another. Kieran looked at Rebecca, who had come to the livery when she heard about the visitor. Her face was pale but composed. "What do you want to do?" she asked quietly. "I want to know the truth," Kieran said. "Not because I need a past, but because if there are people out there who have been grieving for someone they loved, they deserve to know what happened to him. If I am their Kevin, they deserve that closure. And if I am not, at least they can stop wondering." So Kieran traveled to El Paso, and Rebecca went with him, leaving the children in the care of Samuel and his wife. It was the first time they had been away from Sweetwater together since their wedding, and despite the nervous tension about what they might discover, there was something almost exciting about the journey. The Finnegan family lived in a large house on the outskirts of El Paso. The parents, Patrick and Margaret Finnegan, were in their 60s, their faces lined with the years of hoping and grieving. They had 2 other children, daughters who were both married with families of their own. When Kieran and Rebecca arrived, Margaret Finnegan stared at Kieran for a long moment, her eyes filling with tears. "You look like him," she whispered. "You look so much like my Kevin. But you are older now, as he would be. I cannot be certain." They spent 3 days with the Finnegans, talking about Kevin's life, his interests, his plans. Kieran listened to stories about a young man who loved horses, who was thoughtful and kind, who had set out to make his fortune in Texas with dreams of starting a ranch. There were similarities to who Kieran was now, certainly, but there was no spark of recognition, no sudden flood of memories. On the third day, Margaret asked if she could look at Kieran's hands. Kevin had a small scar on his right thumb, she explained, from when he was 10 and tried to whittle a piece of wood. He cut himself badly, and it left a distinctive scar shaped like a hook. Kieran held out his hands. There on his right thumb was a small, curved scar, exactly as she had described. Margaret made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and covered her mouth with her hands. "It is you," she said. "You are my Kevin, my son. You are alive." Kieran stared at the scar he had seen 1,000 times and never thought anything about. "I am sorry," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I am so sorry, but I do not remember you. I do not remember being your son. I wish I could give you that, but I cannot." Patrick Finnegan stepped forward and placed a hand on Kieran's shoulder. "You survived, son. That is what matters. You survived and you built a good life. Your mother and I have mourned you for 19 years. To know you are alive, even if you do not remember us, is more than we ever dared hope for." They talked late into the night, the Finnegans telling Kieran about his childhood, his siblings, his dreams. They showed him photographs and letters, pieces of a life he could not recall. It was strange and emotional and overwhelming, but through it all, Rebecca sat beside him, holding his hand, reminding him that whatever he learned about his past, his present and his future were already decided. Before they left, Margaret gave Kieran a small box. "These were Kevin's things that we saved. Some letters he wrote, a pocket watch that belonged to his grandfather, a few photographs. Whether you remember or not, they are yours. You are our son and we love you." Kieran accepted the box with tears in his eyes. "I have a family in Sweetwater. A wife and 3 children who are my whole world. I cannot be the son you lost, not really. But if you would like, you are welcome to visit us, to know your grandchildren, to be part of our lives. I cannot give you back Kevin as he was, but I can give you Kieran as he is now." Margaret and Patrick both embraced him, and their tears mingled with his. It was closure of a sort, bittersweet but real. They had found their son, even if he could not truly come home to them. But they gained a connection to him and to his family, and that was more than they had hoped for. On the journey back to Sweetwater, Kieran was quiet, processing everything he had learned. Finally, as the train rattled through the Texas landscape, he turned to Rebecca. "I am Kevin Finnegan," he said slowly. "That is who I was, but I do not feel like Kevin. I feel like Kieran Fallen." "Does that make any sense?" "Perfect sense," Rebecca assured him. "Names are just labels. You are the person you have chosen to be, the life you have built, the love you have given and received. Kevin Finnegan might be your legal name, but Kieran Fallen is who you are." He nodded, looking relieved. "I will keep both names then. I am Kieran Finnegan Fallen, but to everyone in Sweetwater, to you and our children, I will always be Kieran Fallen." When they returned home, they told the children about their grandparents in El Paso. Thomas, Ruth, and Samuel were fascinated by the idea that their father had a whole other family he had not known about. The following Christmas, the Finnegans came to visit, and it was awkward at first but ultimately joyful. Margaret and Patrick were delighted to meet their grandchildren, and the children enjoyed having additional grandparents who spoiled them with gifts and attention. The years continued to pass, marked by milestones and memories. Thomas married at 21, bringing a lovely young woman named Clara into the family. They took over running the livery when Samuel finally retired, though the old man still came by most days to offer advice and play with his great-grandchildren. Ruth went to Austin to attend a teaching college, one of the few women in Texas to do so, and she eventually returned to Sweetwater to teach at the school she had attended as a child. Young Samuel, true to his adventurous nature, became a Texas Ranger, which gave Rebecca more gray hairs than she cared to admit. Kieran and Rebecca grew old together gracefully. They had grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Their house was always full of life and laughter and love. The mystery of Kieran's past, once so important and frightening, had become just one part of their story, not the defining element of it. On a spring evening in 1910, 34 years after Kieran had stumbled into Sweetwater with no memory and no identity, he and Rebecca sat together on their porch. They were both in their late 50s or early 60s, though Kieran could never be exactly sure. Their children were grown and successful. Their grandchildren were thriving. The town they had helped build was prosperous and peaceful. "You remember the first day we met?" Rebecca asked, holding Kieran's hand in both of hers. "Of course I do," Kieran said with a smile. "It is literally my first memory. Opening my eyes and seeing you sitting beside my bed, taking care of a stranger you had no reason to help. I saw you fall," Rebecca said softly. "I saw you collapse in the street and something in me knew I had to help. I could not have known then that you would become everything to me. My husband, my partner, the father of my children, my home." "You became my memory, Rebecca," Kieran said, his voice thick with emotion even after all these years. "When I had nothing, no past and no future, you gave me both. You gave me a reason to build a new life, and then you built that life with me. Every good thing I have, every happy memory I possess, starts with you." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors. They had survived drought and hardship, bounty hunters and mysteries, the challenges of raising children and building a business. They had loved each other through it all with a depth and constancy that had only grown stronger with time. "I love you, Kieran Fallon," Rebecca whispered. "My mysterious stranger who became my whole world." "I love you, Rebecca Fallon," he replied. "My first memory, my last thought every night, and my home for all the days of my life." They had built something beautiful together, something lasting. Their love story would be told by their children and grandchildren for generations to come. The tale of a man who woke with no memory and a woman who became his entire world. It was a story of second chances and new beginnings, of choosing love even when the future was uncertain, of building a home not from memories of the past, but from hope for the future. And as the sun set over Sweetwater, Texas, on that spring evening in 1910, Kieran and Rebecca Fallon sat together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had raised, and the love that had sustained them through everything. It was, in the end, the only story that mattered. Not who Kieran had been before, but who they had become together. Their story did not end that evening, of course. They had many more years together, years filled with the joys and sorrows that come with a long life well lived. They saw their youngest son Samuel marry and settle down, finally giving up his dangerous work as a ranger to become a marshal in Sweetwater. They welcomed more grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They celebrated anniversaries and holidays, always surrounded by family and friends who loved them. The Finnegans remained part of their lives, visiting regularly and forming real relationships with their son's family. Margaret and Patrick eventually passed away peacefully in their 80s, grateful to have known their son in his new life even if he could not remember his old one. Kieran inherited the family home in El Paso, which he sold and used the money to establish a fund for the Sweetwater School, ensuring that children in their town would have opportunities for education that might not otherwise exist. In 1920, 44 years after that fateful day when Kieran stumbled into town, Rebecca fell ill. She was 67 years old, and her body was simply wearing out. Kieran sat beside her bed, just as she had once sat beside his, holding her hand and talking to her about their life together. Their children and grandchildren came to say goodbye, filling the house with love and tears. "I am not afraid," Rebecca told Kieran on her last evening. "I have lived a beautiful life. I loved deeply and was loved in return. I raised good children and saw them raise good children of their own. I have no regrets, my darling." "You saved me," Kieran said, his voice breaking. "You gave me everything, Rebecca. My life, my name, my family, my purpose. How do I go on without you?" She smiled, her eyes still bright despite her failing body. "You go on because I am part of you now, just as you are part of me. Every memory you have, I am in. Every choice you made, I was beside you. I am not leaving you, Kieran. I am becoming part of your memory, your story, your heart. We will be together always." She passed away that night, peacefully in her sleep, with Kieran holding her hand. He mourned her deeply, as did everyone who had known her. The town of Sweetwater came together for her funeral, honoring a woman who had been a pillar of their community for over 4 decades. Kieran lived for another 8 years after Rebecca's death. He spent that time surrounded by family, helping raise his great-grandchildren and serving as a source of wisdom and comfort to everyone who knew him. He never remarried, never even considered it. Rebecca had been his one great love, the person who had defined his entire existence, and no one could ever take her place. In the spring of 1928, 52 years after he had stumbled into Sweetwater with no memory and no past, Kieran Fallon passed away in his sleep at the age of 77. He was buried beside Rebecca in the Sweetwater Cemetery, under a stone that read simply, "Kieran Fallon, beloved husband, father, and friend." His first memory and his lasting home, but their story did not truly end even then. Their children told it to their grandchildren, who told it to their children. It became part of Sweetwater's history, the tale of the stranger with no memory who found love and built a legacy. The livery they had owned became a landmark, eventually converted into a museum that told the story of the town's growth. The school Rebecca had supported educated generations of children, many of whom went on to accomplish great things, and credited their success to the foundation laid by people like Kieran and Rebecca Fallon. Their great-great-grandchildren would visit Sweetwater decades later, walking past the house where Kieran and Rebecca had raised their family, standing at their graves and marveling at the love story that had started their family line. The story was told and retold, changing slightly with each telling but always maintaining its essential truth. That love was not about knowing everything about someone's past, but about choosing to build a future together. That home was not a place, but a person, a feeling, a choice to stay and build something beautiful even when it would have been easier to walk away. Kieran had woken with no memory of his former life, and Rebecca had become his new memory and his home. Together, they had created something that lasted far beyond their own years, a legacy of love and commitment and choosing each other every single day. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth celebrating. And in the telling, Kieran and Rebecca Fallon lived on, their love echoing through generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when we let go of who we were and embrace who we can become. Their love had been tested by mystery and fear, by doubt and uncertainty, but it had endured. It had grown deeper and stronger with every passing year, every shared joy and sorrow, every choice to stay together when staying was hard. That was the real legacy they left behind, not the businesses they built or the money they earned, but the example of what true love looked like. Love that was patient and kind, love that bore all things and believed all things, love that never failed. In the end, Kieran Fallon had found something more valuable than his lost memories. He had found a life worth living, a woman worth loving, and a family worth building. He had found his home, and it had been with Rebecca from that very first moment when he opened his eyes and saw her sitting beside his bed. She had been his first memory, his last thought, and his constant companion through a life that was richer and fuller than anything he could have imagined in those dark early days when he knew nothing but fear and confusion. They had loved greatly, lived fully, and left behind a legacy that would endure for generations. And in the hearts of everyone who knew their story, Kieran and Rebecca Fallon would live forever, a testament to the power of love to heal, to transform, and to create something beautiful from even the most unlikely beginnings. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love eternal. And that was the happiest ending of all.